Live. So folks are our chit chat is starting right now.
We are alive. We are
We are.
live. We
All
are
right.
alive.
We are alive. We are alive. We are here. We have dialogue to present to you and an important topic today. I think the last couple episodes we've done, we've really tried to focus on the importance of being creative, right? Being um, engaged with the good parts of what it is to be human, and what we can do, whether that's in our community, whether that's in our music or our art. And one of the great takeaways I think from that dialogue, for me with Nick, last week, when John and Nick had this fantastic discussion about composition and music and creativity, is that pretty much everything is art. If it comes from within your mind and you have to create that, if that's a manifestation of you, and whether it's a process at work, whether it is a speech, it's like saying, well, the performing arts are arts, right? They're not producing a physical piece of music or a painting, but it's still absolutely art, right? So it's the act of creation. And
Writ
as a whole,
large. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. And as a whole, me and John, we've talked about the UN more than already once. Actually, we talked about the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights
Yeah.
very early on, and that's something I do think we should return to, as I mention it, because human rights are something that really just we need to reestablish that those are important. So the
And
UN,
in the context of what we may be talking about today, I mean, you're going to lead the discussion, Shane, but
yeah.
you know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is established like whatever 80 years ago, or roughly, right?
Hmm.
Um, uh, was a discussion at that time because of essentially a crisis in society where we had
Hmm.
a world war that implicated a whole bunch of nations. And
Right.
so the Human Rights Declaration has subsided. But even if you just extend the human rights notion from the Declaration of Human Rights to like the rights of animals and plants and water,
Mhm.
and that actually we are part of nature. And so for humans to have their rights respected, we have to make sure nature's rights are respected.
Right.
We're all in this together, where it's a holistic thing that, if the planet doesn't provide us with enough water, we won't be humans anymore. We'll be gone.
Right. Yeah. I always say, right, like people lack imagination, right? Like what is really possible? And I actually did a thought experiment on a live stream the other day. And I actually would love to share it with you, because I think you'll really appreciate it. And the nature of the conversation was about, we were talking about climate change in general, right? But, trying to bring this idea to people through a philosophical, equate thought experiment, right? One is the other, therefore we can do this. And it's like people don't think about the planet that we live on like it's part of the universe, like like the rules of everything else apply to Earth. We
Right.
talk about space like it's space. What happens out in space happens in space. But physics and everything that happens on Earth is, in fact, beholden to the same laws that govern the rest of the universe. And so the idea, and for those of you who are not science savvy, in terms of confidence in science, we have three levels, right? You have your hypothesis, which is effectively you're just saying, I think maybe this. Okay. You have a theory, which is something that is demonstratively consistent. It's accurate generally, like you get a consistent answer, but you can't verifiably prove it beyond the confidence that is required to be established as the highest ranking of verifiability, which is a law, right? These are the things that we know govern the universe. This is gravity, right? This is time. These are things we know exist. Now, the focus of the experiment, though, is I want to go dial in on one of these laws, and that's the law of entropy, right? These in thermodynamics. So we know that entropy is the law, that things are going to go one way or the other based on the fact that a state of something is never staying the same way.
Right.
We can attribute entropy to a law. We know that entropy applies to all systems. We can say this because it is a law, which means it's universal. We can then establish that the Earth is governed by systems because the Earth is not an exception. It is beholden to the laws of the universe. Then we can establish that change is equivalent to entropy, which is equivalent to the law. So change is the law. Consistency is not the law.
Yeah. So another way to say that is the only constant is change.
Correct, right? So when people say it's all chaos, it's true. But chaos doesn't need to be a scary word. It's just reality.
Normal.
So exactly. So we can then establish that change, like human change, would interact with Earth systems because it is not an exception. The law says that a system experiencing change will become unstable. Earth is not the exception. Tipping points are what we call extreme change or change that is not reversible. And the law does not say that, and when we say entropy or change is not mandated to be reversible. That doesn't fall under entropy. Change is inevitable, but reversibility is not. We know that fossil fuels with rapid change drives us to a tipping point where we see and we can bring out momentum. Momentum is also the law. Momentum falls under entropy. It is the idea of building up speed, or basically your tipping point, right? You're going to go faster and faster and faster. Momentum is the law because change and momentum all fall under that entropy bubble. We know that momentum can lead to cascading collapse. When a system gets faster and faster and more chaotic, eventually entropy change mandates that it either breaks apart or it changes.
Right.
We know that capitalistic societies are driven by momentum. That momentum has manifested in our lives as fossil fuels, which have driven greed, which is driving us beyond multiple tipping points.
Yeah, totally agree.
Which will cause total failure. So we know that we can establish through this thought experiment that capitalism will lead to total system failure. Now, why do things need to be capitalist? My fundamental ending here is we know the law says that if we keep doing what we're doing, we're looking at total system collapse. That's the law. That's not an opinion. That's not something that you can argue or debate. We understand the fundamental laws of the universe. It's one of the things we can usually say with a degree of confidence. You can observe these things. Now, here's what I propose. Not a capitalist mindset, but a survivalist mindset. Momentum plus science plus human creativity leads us to not total failure, but a question mark. And that needs to be the path forward because we know the system we're operating within will lead to total system failure because that's what the law says. So I don't know if what do you think about that kind of thought experiment?
What caught my attention is you say that it inevitably leads to total collapse. That capitalism necessarily leads to total collapse, but if you take greed and undue profit out of the capitalist model so that it's only reverting back, if we can revert back. Of course, it won't revert back to something. It'll reconfigure itself so that it might resemble early capitalism, for example.
Mhm.
Then you might be able to mitigate enough so that a total collapse doesn't happen, right?
Right.
So when I read the UN water bankruptcy document,
Right.
um, it was creating the metaphor of basically your personal finances, that you have savings account,
Right.
you have checking account, you have
Mhm.
investments, and so on. And if you, for example, you have income, um, what would be a good metaphor? Let's say, for example, you're a middle class family. You have, your income from the work that you do. So that's employment income. Let's say you own a little condo somewhere that's giving you a little bit of rent, and you have your expenses, right? Now, what the water document is saying is that we have been spending our water resources faster than they can be repleted. So, in other words, I've got income of whatever 50,000 a year, but I'm spending 60. Oh well, if I do that, then I'm going to have to go into my savings and deplete my capital. Or if you want to look at it as an investment, you have capital, and then you have the income from the capital in your investment. Let's say you've got a foundation, and the foundation is worth $1 million, and it creates a revenue of whatever, 5 or 10%. And you use that income to keep your foundation going. Well, if you spend more money than the income that the capital is creating, then you're going to have to eat into your capital. And as soon as you do that, you reduce your income. And if you keep going that way, you end up with no money. And that's what the water bankruptcy, the global water bankruptcy document is talking about. It's that we've just been spending water as though it's just going to keep coming in. But in fact, it isn't going to keep coming in. And so the tipping point, if you look at any of those graphs in that document, the tipping point has got there. I mean, we're there. We're over the tipping point in terms of
Correct.
our use and abuse of water,
Right.
and water being central to everything. Um, and everything comes down to water. Fossil fuel extraction comes down to water. AI data centers comes down to water. Sanitation systems comes down to water. Everything comes down to, can I drink water today?
3 days, right? 3 days. No water, 3 days, you're dead. Like that's the law, right? That's the human system. The human system
Right.
in the nature of systems. Like if I think where we really need in our society and where you're lacking, and when I say society, I mean the global society. I mean that people as a whole. I think that if we have the internet, we can choose to be a global society. We can choose to transcend the societies that are limited or limited by a government, right? We can choose to connect and form our own society. It's something the internet provides that's never been possible before in a
Yeah.
sense of unity, a potentially globally united society, a common interest through everybody, whether it's me in here in California and John in Canada, and the people who are struggling in Kenya from drought and famine. We can all communicate and be a global society. If we are a global society, we can be aware of other places and other people. Because look, this report that John is referencing came out on January 29th of this year. And it got no press, zero. I mean, I reported on it, and I think I was the only person, at least in my space, that reported on it.
Right.
You would think that the United Nations coming out and saying that over, and I'm going to give you the real numbers. This alone should jar everyone. It certainly was jarring to me. This report, which was published by a Canadian university funded by Canada and its institutions through the UN.
Actually,
They
I have to correct you there, um,
please.
because it was actually United Nations University,
Mm,
okay, that published the document with financial assistance from the Canadian government. And
there
and
we go.
and that
Okay.
university, because it's the United Nations, that university can actually be anywhere. And I think, if I remember right, it was actually in Ontario or something.
Yeah.
So you're kind of right, but at the
Kind
same
of right.
time, you
But
know, that's the whole point of the United Nations. To return to your metaphor about us all talking on the internet, that's what the United Nations is. It's us all talking in the United Nations before the internet was born, right?
yeah.
So this UN document is a really important one. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I appreciate the correction because as someone who is literally trying and screaming at the internet for integrity and accuracy, even
Right.
little things like that matter.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you provided that. But this is very jarring. And if you read nothing else, this will be enough for you. This report essentially states that 2.2 billion people right now lack safely managed drinking water. 3.5 billion lack safely managed sanitation, and 4 billion experience severe water scarcity at least 1 month per year.
Right.
That is a lot of people. That is I don't know the exact human population. I don't think we're to 10 billion yet. I think we're closer to 9, maybe.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's if not 50 years ago in earlier in our lives, it would have been 50%. Like, a decade or two ago, that's 50% just about of the entire human population. This is like they just said that like 40 to 50% potentially of humanity is looking at serious water shortage.
Water
Uh,
insecurity. Yeah.
Water insecurity, bankruptcy. They're using the term bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And this has applications. This is not people in Africa just not being able to drink for all the Western white people that have like this is much bigger than that. You're
Yeah. Well,
talking please go ahead.
I think it's important for our viewers to for us to maybe talk about this document a little bit if we're going to go into that topic. Again, Shane, you're leading the story today, so um, do you want to talk about that document at all right now?
No, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about this first, and then I want to use it to kind of transition into like this is an example of what the UN can do, and
Right.
that's why I think it's a good lead in because then we are going to talk about the UN as a whole.
Okay.
And the reason I want to highlight this one is because the importance of our climate and our environment in a time where people aren't discussing it, and it's never been more important.
Okay.
And this disproportionately affects the global south. Particularly, we're seeing it in Africa, but it doesn't mean it's not affecting everywhere else.
Okay.
Here's the
So
scary. Go ahead.
can I just pause for a second and just for our viewers to know, we say water bankruptcy, and you might want to know at this point, because we said it, what the heck does that mean? Okay, so
Mhm.
we have been viewing water crises as though those crises can be resolved and we can return to normal. And that's
Correct.
been the language that's used by governments for decades. When we have a drought, oh, well, we have to, ration water this year, and maybe next year we don't, and so on. But this UN document is saying that we have entered a period of bankruptcy, and we have to restructure like a business that goes bankrupt. They have spent too much money, they have too many
Mhm.
creditors, they have to restructure to rethink the way they do business. And that's what we have to do with water. We can't think we're ever going back to any previous availability of water. We have to basically start over. And at every level of government across the globe, people have to completely rethink the way they do things. And that's what the fossil fuel issue also brought up. So that's what the bankruptcy metaphor means.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction too. Is I like what we're telling you, what this report is telling us, and these are the greatest minds from around the world. These are sponsored by the United Nations. This is a collaborative effort. This is a global effort. They're not just this. Sorry, go ahead.
It's science.
It's science. It's pure distilled science, no opinions, no motive other than information. And actually, the motive here is we don't want humanity to go extinct. And like, this is hard for me to say. This is hard. This is a hard thing for me to talk about because there's a taboo in our society about being alarmist about the climate. Like, it stresses everyone out, so don't talk about it. Yeah, it's stressful. It is stressful. And it's like, well, we just have to choose to change. And that choice is not possible. So it's not possible. So the general way we've adapted is to just stop talking about this. And this is not a situation where you're like, okay, well, even okay, I'm in North America, I'm in Canada, I'm gonna be fine, right? I'm in Europe, I'm gonna
Precisely.
be fine. It
Right.
doesn't work like that because we're not talking about them people in Africa not just being able to get water. We're talking about over half of the global food supply no longer being viable. We're talking about 50% of what's in the grocery store disappearing in a matter of years
Right.
because this isn't a thing where it's a slow, gradual, the crops just fail and
Right.
then they just don't come.
Right.
The so wetlands are one of the primary ecosystems on Earth. They are super important. They have
Right.
lots of plants, bacteria. It's one of our oxygen or carbon sinks, right? A lot of these big forests and places. We've lost 410 million hectares of natural wetlands in 50 years.
Right.
That's literally the landmass of the EU.
Right.
I mean, the ecosystem service losses, okay, like the valuation of the resources within that is $5.1 trillion.
Right.
Okay, we've lost $5.1 trillion in productivity of resources that could be used to sustain humankind.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, and isn't that if you're reading the same one I think I remember, it's equivalent to the GDP of the 135 poorest countries in the world. To put all those 135 countries' GDPs together, and that's how much money has been lost. So, the only people making money are the people who are basically stealing it from those 135 countries. To
yeah,
use the metaphor, right?
yeah.
We have to fight against that. That's the sociopolitical agenda that has to follow on from this report. Go ahead. I interrupted again.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think that's like, please interrupt me, right? Because like, I've read all this. The important part is to get other people's perspective, your perspective, and for us to talk about these things. So when you have a thought, please just, interject. But, I want to talk the other part of this. 70% of our groundwater, our major aquifers are showing long-term declines. Excessive pumping is driving land subsidence. What is subsidence? Okay. It's when groundwater is not like the dirt is just kind of saturated. Groundwater is when over lots of time you have a pocket of water that is effectively a reservoir underground
Right.
and it's like a pool, right? It's a filled space. Now, if you over pump that and you just extract all the water from it and you leave that negative space empty for long enough, it will collapse. Well, what does that
Boom.
mean? Well, one, it means everything above it falls through and you have
Sinkhole.
a giant sinkhole.
Right.
But the other part is it won't refill anymore.
That's right.
Think about that.
Right.
These countries in the Middle East, the most dramatic thing we're going to see in the next 2 to 3 years is the collapse of the the agricultural capacity of the Middle East and the Sahel region of Africa, where we're rapidly seeing these reservoirs deplete.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons for this: overuse, excessive use, of course, but atmospheric warming makes it harder for water to stay in a liquid state in these very hot places.
Right.
You have the just global migration of atmospheric rivers, which are changing due to the environment of the system, right? Let's follow our entropy. They're not going to stay the same if conditions change.
Yeah.
This is terraforming. We are terraforming the planet, just not intentionally. We're just doing it because we're not paying attention, and or the money is more important than the outcome. But we have not just water bankruptcy, but part of this is going to be contributed to not only groundwater supply, but rain and the change of the atmospheric rivers and how water moves around the planet. This is verifiable by the data that we have. We are talking about multi-year droughts, right? Where these countries in Africa, why are they constantly talking about famine? Because they can't grow food
Right.
because it's too dry, right? Again, this is one of the things the UN does. They're the organization that is stopping hundreds of millions, potentially billions of people from starving to death.
Right. Exactly.
And so there's a lot more to this too, right? We have the cryosphere. This is where all of our ice is. A lot of this stuff is locked up in these glaciers. A lot of places get their water where? From the peaks of the mountains, whether that's the Himalayas in California, it's the Sierra Nevada, right? All of these places you have meltwater. Well, in East Asia, the Himalayas and around India, they're seeing their glaciers deplete.
Right.
They're starting to see drought. India is considering breaking the Indus Water Treaty for many reasons, but they're effectively talking about they are building a dam which will be finished on March 31st. I don't know if you heard about this, John. They announced this, and they're going to use it to divert the water supply that is normally going into Pakistan to other territories in India, effectively turning off 90%, at least a significant portion of the 90% of water that supports 90% of their agriculture is supported by this supply of water. You're talking about a induced famine, and their groundwater isn't sufficient because it's already been depleted. You can look at these countries in the Middle East. There's pictures of these sinkholes in Turkey. You're seeing entire fields where they've just over-farmed collapse into the ground. Lake Chad is decreased by 90%.
Right.
90%.
Okay, so I just want to interrupt for a moment because you're providing a lot of examples from places very far away. So this, humans have this thing about first they came for the, the intellectuals, then they came for the homosexuals, then they came for the Jews, and then they came for me, and there was nobody left to, defend me. It's the same psychology. Oh, we're sitting here lovely in the United States and Canada, and our lives are, what do you mean? Our lives are fine, Can you please, I don't know if you can show the Lake Corpus Christi picture that over 4 years, the lake practically went half of its size. It's a photograph from, I can't remember which page in that report. And the lake in 4 years, you can see the first photograph, all of the farmland is green and verdant, and the lake is big. 4 years later, you can see the crops are failing. It's brown, and the lake is half the size it was 4 years previous. And this is in the United States of America.
Here, you can see it right here. Okay, so this is what John's talking about. Look at this river. Okay, you've got the river that is feeding this lake. And you see, what do? They build out all of these fields. Look at where they're doing this, right? They're diverting this water into these fields. Again, systems, entropy. The water is going to go where it's going to go until that tipping point is passed. And then it's going to stop working because we're talking about systems. Systems are going to react to change. This is what global food supply collapse looks like. Right. This is what this looks like, right? You look at these fields, they're failing. And US data centers, the Colorado River, okay, is declining. Okay. The major US aquifers are being depleted. And the president yesterday in his address in a roundabout statement, said that they're going to let the companies build their own power infrastructure, their own power supply, which means they're going to let private corporations privatize and therefore tap into our groundwater supplies in the United States, place like this. And it's something that is going to, we're seeing it. Like this is, we can no longer ignore the science. And this is the value that the UN provides us. And so I'm going to use this kind of opportunity because I feel like that was such a concise visual, and I hope that sticks with you. And remember the Brown, remember the timeline. John said 4 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Like 4 years. That's the timelines we're talking about. There's no law that says systems have to change slowly. And hold on, somebody wants to leave the room.
Hear that?
Yeah. And so, right, I feel like that is most certainly, you can have the debate, right? You can have the conversation. Well, we need to wait for America. The midterms are coming. This is what I'm telling you. I mean, 4 or 5 months can make all of the difference.
Yeah. Can I just read from it's very small print down here.
Please.
But language is a great thing. Language enables you to think about stuff in a certain way. And they are describing the image that you see in front of you is something that is considered a local disaster in their area there. And it's quite obviously a disaster because the farm fields are all brown. And it says that it's a symptom of global water bankruptcy, a condition where claim capacity mismatches is what they're using as a term. Claim capacity mismatch, which means we're using more water than the capacity of water to regenerate itself. That's what claim capacity mismatch means. We humans are claiming this much water, but there isn't that much water there. We're under an illusion that this water is always going to be there. And it's, what it implies is that private corporations can't be trusted to manage any of this because they don't care about this. They're in for short-term profits, for dividends for shareholders this year. Or maybe they've got a 5-year horizon. I don't know, but they can't be trusted to give up their profit motive. They can't be trusted to manage things so that it benefits all of humanity because they have a mandate to make the maximum profit for their shareholders. That's the mandate of almost every corporation. And that's why, they don't say any of that stuff outright in this document, but they talk about cooperation, peace, justice for all of the people of the world. And as soon as you combine those things together, it requires that corporations no longer rape the world. And we come back to the metaphor of raping, which of course is in the news all the time these days. That the whole concept of domination of others for your own personal profit and benefit and to their detriment, that model has to be completely rethought or abandoned, I would say. And so, everybody's going to come up and say, oh, capitalism, socialism, communism, blah, blah, blah. No, it's called survival. It's as simple as
called cooperation is how we survive.
That's correct.
Right? If you want to run, like the irony here is that it's going to be a lot of the dictatorships that go first, right? Like a lot of these countries, like Pakistan, right? It's a dictatorship. They treat their people horribly, right? They've mismanaged all their water. Iran, again, there's a reason, at least in my mind, that the conversation and the stories I was covering in Iran before the protests erupted, what I was watching was the basically water shortage, where you could use the satellite images of their reservoirs, and there was no debate that they were going to run out of water in a matter of weeks to months. In Tehran, a city that is a population of 32 million, as well as the fact that Tehran is literally falling apart due to subsidence, like we talked about, where they've depleted their groundwater and it's just falling apart. It damages infrastructure. It's not a one-stop shop, right? Nothing happens in isolation. This is what is so important about critical thinking. Is we as a society need to be able to look at a world that is governed by systems that are cause and effect and that are acted on by multiple different forces simultaneously. We don't get the luxury of just looking at things simply. The world isn't simple.
Right.
And the emphasis on education and cooperation is a human societies that were most successful usually were focused on cooperation and sustainability.
Right. And so, again, back to the idea, it's a 20th century idea that the most important conflicting forces in the world are communism and capitalism. And so, so the great old leader is going to go in and bomb Iran because we have to have regime change. Well, actually, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is not to dominate, not to go in and bomb other countries and try to force a change in government that is apparently going to do what? I mean, all governments, regardless of whether you as a citizen of the United States or Britain or anywhere else, you don't like the way they do things in Iran. Okay, well, so what? Can't the people of Iran decide what they want to do? Oh, but they can't do it because it's a dictatorship. Yes, that's true. It's difficult. But I don't see how dominating other countries and the notion of domination is going to get us anywhere at this point. Only cooperation is going to get us somewhere. And only if people stop putting up these wars as solutions to anything, that's got to come to an end, because it's just not leading to sustainable results.
Nothing is sustainable, right? Like it's one of those things where governments themselves are so deeply intertwined with the global trade system that has been built over the last 50 years, which has been built around oil.
Right.
Oil is one of the core foundational elements of global trade. It is considered an economic stability indicator. In some places, it's a haven asset. When other things go bad, people go in on oil. Right. Like what the U.S. does in Iran affects global markets. Why? Because it affects the flow of oil.
Right.
What happens when the countries exporting the oil collapse into anarchy because they can't provide their people with water? What happens then?
Right.
The assumption with capitalism, and before we transition into this conversation as well, that I want to talk about the United Nations and the Board of Peace, because we're seeing both of these things. There's the UN, which is the existing structure we have for international governance and standards. And then you have this Board of Peace, which is a attempt to capture the international law and create a system that operates outside of the scrutiny of traditional UN limitations for foreign intervention.
For sure. It's not a board of peace. If you look at the people who are the prime suspects, let's call them, in the board, BORED, Board of Peace, they are the criminals. Mm-hmm. They are the lawless ones. These are not people who are going to set up laws that are going to protect any of us. They are not going to set up laws that create peace worldwide. They're the warriors. They're the people who are causing the major conflicts. Of course, they'll say, oh, no, we're innocent. It's the other people who are causing the wars. They're going to say that, of course. They've been lying through their teeth for decades. So that's the problem, is that this Board of Peace is literally BORED.
Yeah, it's Board of Peace. Yeah. Like they don't want peace. No. And understand I think their mentality to addressing this crisis is not cooperation. I think a big part of it is it's not cooperation. They believe in the seizure of resources. They believe in basically capturing and maintaining control over those resources themselves, as opposed to actually fixing the systemic problem. They are chronically short-sighted. It's something about the billionaire class that, you can't argue. The argument these people are so smart and it makes them all their money just doesn't hold up in court, because
It
their
sure
long-term
doesn't.
decisions are so stupid and short-sighted. These people don't possess critical thinking.
Okay,
They
so let's
think,
talk. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, so and that's part of what I would say the UN prioritizes, is providing verifiable, trackable
Right,
results.
right.
And it's not perfect. In fact, the UN, and me and John have this, is inherently broken in many ways,
Oh, yeah.
in its ability to do its job. But the UN has also provided us with a universal law for human rights. It has provided us with the forum to actually, we've had the chance as humans to stop climate collapse and water bankruptcy, thanks to the UN, to the
Yeah,
forum the UN provided. We didn't take those opportunities, but the UN provided us those opportunities. It
yeah,
is proven to be able to intervene in humanitarian crises. We've seen it work again and again, right? It's something that we've really, like, you can see all of these, organs. You have the Security Council, the General Assembly, you have the Secretariat International, a court of justice, International Court of Justice. You have the Trusteeship Council, you have peacekeeping agencies, you have humanitarian development agencies.
of course.
These are all the UNHCR, right? You have the WFP, WHO, UNICEF. All of these things are stopping anarchy. Like, the
Yeah,
UN is the last barrier between anarchy and some level of stability,
sure.
um, in the global order.
Yeah,
Because
but there's a problem. There's a problem.
yes,
And the problem is that the majority of those members want peace and security, and they want to follow the UN Charter. But they have something called the Security Council. And the Security Council allows Israel and the United States, well, not Israel, I guess, the United States
the
has a
United States
veto
is
power.
Israel.
And
They
and
operate for Israel.
yeah, of course. So, but the problem is this idea of a veto power. Okay, so
Mhm.
okay, when the UN was established, the veto power was maybe a good idea. To because the great countries that helped the world end the Second World War should be given a veto power just to make sure that no rogue states, manage to convince a bunch of people to do some rogue things. But when the people with the security with the veto power themselves are the rogue state, then the UN falls apart. The UN, like 95% of the members say we want this, and the United States holds up their hand and says we veto that. So the problem with the United Nations is not the organization, it's the Security Council, which in my view should be done away with. It should be one
Absolutely.
vote per member, period. And in that way, the United Nations would become a relevant organization in terms of what it's able to accomplish
Yeah.
with these international consensus issues, right? And the
Mhm.
Board of Peace is a gangster organization.
Correct. The Board of Peace is it's a board. Okay. Where does that term come from? That's a capitalist business term. That
Right,
the board advises a corporation. They We know they want to build a corporate structure for the global world order. It's
right,
evident in how they do everything. If you
right.
really want to understand what they're doing, just look up special economic zones. Look up the term special economic zone, and then look at every single treaty, agreement, trade deal, anything that has been facilitated by this United States regime.
Right.
You will find ample evidence of this attempt to create a parallel structure that is ungovernable, uh, and unbeholden to international law, where effectively corporations can become the law. Uh, it's really staggering. And where are they entering these zones? These zones are trade arteries, right? They're, for example, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in the Uvira region, they want to set up a special economic zone at the Lake Kivu in that area, and that area they want would be the trade artery to 4 different African countries. Is that's where all of the roads split. They want to control the nodes of distribution of global power in terms of the supply chain and the economy. They're trying to do this through special economic zones. This is also what their new version of Gaza, New Gaza, which there's proof. Jared Kushner was literally pitching this. He had a slideshow at the World Economic Forum. If you don't believe me, look it up. I can't stand his stupid voice. He sounds like a robot, but it's real, right?
And he's been talking about that since October 8th.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a real estate investment prospect. I remember his exact words were, "Oh, it's tragic what's going on in Gaza right now, but it's an opportunity." That's the way he pitched it.
It's an opportunity.
Opportunity.
Right.
That's what these people are all about. And the special economic zones are allow corporations to essentially go in where they've been set up and do things without environmental regulation, and essentially, once again, rape the land. Basically, come in and fuck the people. Excuse my F word, but really,
no, I think that counts. About. I think that's valid. I think that's a valid time to use that word, because what else do you say, right? Like, this is the rape of mankind. There's no simple way to put it, because I want to give you guys some examples of what the UN has done and their demonstrated success, right? Because I'm going to be fair to the Board of Peace. I'm going to say which they don't deserve, but for the sake of the argument, I'm going to be fair and give them a chance to demonstrate their value. So in Namibia in 1990, they were able to stabilize the country following a massive conflict and transfer power over to a democratically elected government. That's a huge success, especially in an African country like Namibia. In East Timor in 2002, the UN facilitated independence and a democratic transition for the country. Like Sierra Leone, 2005, disarmament and reintegration of combatants in Sierra Leone. In Cyprus, they froze the conflict with a UN buffer force, and they presented escalation for decades. But most importantly is the institutional achievements of the UN, the eradication of smallpox, the non-nuclear proliferation architecture, the IAEA, right? The International Atomic Energy Association, they are. I might have messed, but they manage and prevent weapons and nuclear proliferation en masse around the world. The UNHCR, human rights, right? United Nations human human rights, right? And then you have the Kosovo intervention, where a NATO-led UN-authorized intervention stopped an ethnic cleansing. The same is trying to be done in Gaza, but here's where our failures, and you start to see the successes. Unfortunately, the list of failures is longer than the successes, but I would note that their failures are all tied to the ability to stop conflict, not provide humanitarian aid, but to stop conflict between nations. And that goes exactly back to what you were talking about, John, with the veto and the Security Council and the inability for effective intervention. Haiti is a mess, and the UN was supposed to be managing Haiti, like they were supposed to be helping Haiti. The country is run by gangs, and the United States is trying to install a unelected puppet dictator who was a businessman.
Right.
The country is just, it's horrific what's going on in Haiti. This is another failure of the UN we're seeing. Their inability to get past these barriers and actually help people and stop violent conflict.
And is it because of the veto? Is it because the United States says, no, 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 you can't do that. We don't want that conflict to be resolved. We want to profit from it. You see,
Right.
this is where I'm deeply suspicious of the Israeli armaments industry and their ties to the United States and to Europe, providing armaments to all sorts of countries, all sorts of military business contracts between Israel and the rest of the world. And whenever the UN wants to resolve a conflict peaceably, you get these situations where there's a veto happening, and the UN is not allowed in, or they have a false flag thing like, oh, the UN WRA UNRWA was, had Hamas members in it, so therefore everybody must immediately shut down all of their activities. Yeah, there was no proof, you know.
Hmm.
So these kinds of fighting international justice, which the United States and Israel have been doing now for decades, is something that, you ask yourself, well, what faith should we have in countries that consistently fight international justice that has been determined by a consensus of the world leaders and nations to be a court, the international court, that is what do you call it? Justified. That's the wrong word. Legitimate. That's the word.
Hmm.
A legitimate body, right? And so that's why so many people within the United States are fed up with the administration, because they're so clearly in cahoots with Israel and so clearly violating basic human rights that any sane person would say this should not happen.
Yeah, I mean, well, the United States in its current form has killed over 140 people extrajudicially in the Caribbean and the Pacific now,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like the UN Human Rights Council, like they have condemned it, right? Turk, who is the High Commissioner, uh, has said multiple times, right, that like they need to stop, like they're breaking international law, but it doesn't matter, and that's where I think we are seeing the enforcement capacity, right? The United Nations has moved from its original intent, which was to be the stabilizing body, the ability for 192 other countries to enact leverage and sanction, or isolate or choose to help a singular country, is very powerful. The UN had the potential for global democracy.
Right.
You had a chance for global democracy. That chance still exists. But awareness is so important. Why are we talking about this now? Because the United States is refusing to pay its dues to the United Nations, to the tune of some $4 billion they owe in some capacity.
Yeah.
I believe they provided 600 million. And then they announced shortly after that they're providing $10 billion to the Board of Peace. What is the Board of Peace? I think the best way to, define the Board of Peace, we've kind of talked about it, but it's a diplomatic container for businesses and private wealthy individuals to buy into a new attempt to undermine the international world order, to create a parallel body that can instead choose to intervene in conflicts, facilitate peace deals. And there's a lot of reasoning around this. A lot of it, I think, is part of their play in Gaza. And that if they say, oh, the Board of Peace is going to do this, like the UN's not, they isolate and they control it, and there's nothing really anyone can do.
Right.
But the Board of Peace in general, it's much smaller than the UN by a significant margin.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also the current members. I want to read you a list of the members.
Oh, okay.
Because I think this is interesting. So who did join the Board of Peace? Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, Israel, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Hungary, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Vietnam, Argentina, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Morocco, Bahrain, Albania, Belarus, and Oman. You know who
All
chose
friends of Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, you know who chose not to join the Board of Peace?
Oh,
France, Germany, the UK,
yeah.
Canada, Italy, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Spain, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Poland. What does that mean? All of the global powers just said no, thank you to the Board of Peace. And you know who is on the Board of Peace? All of the corrupt governments
Right.
of the world
Right.
that I can tell you for a fact that in my research, every single one of these countries has some backdoor deal with Donald Trump
Well,
or Jared
that's what I was
Kushner.
about to say. That's what I was about to say. You know, the Board of Peace is very simple. It's the United States wanting to not only dominate the hemisphere, which means our country and Mexico and so on, but they want to dominate the world, and they only invite those people onto the Board of Peace so that they can get some of the crumbs after they've taken over. So the U.S. will take over various parts of the world, and then they'll give special contracts to these little dictatorships. That's what the Board of Peace is all about. So I just want to, because we're almost running out of time,
Yeah.
just to add to the weight that the United Nations organizations have on world affairs. Something came through my feed just recently that made the following observation. The number of deaths from those who relied on U.S. aid far exceeds the total death of Gaza and Sudan put together already within less than 1 year. Does that hit the newspapers? No. Does that hit the newspapers? No. Nobody cares about those lives. Those lives are dispensable lives. And this is the whole structural racism that's embedded in the Northern Hemisphere, the complete disregard for brown lives. Generally brown, because of course there is no white and there is no black. It's all melatonin, and it's all a shade of brown of some
It's so
sort.
arbitrary to me. It's insane that
Yeah.
that
Oh,
governs our world when it's like literally the only difference between me and someone in Africa is the melanin content in my skin. And if we really want to be really annoying about it, the first people were black.
right.
It's Africa. Africa is actually, and the Middle East is the cradle of humanity. We know
Right.
that, right? Like there's so many interesting societies in Africa that we know nothing about
Right.
because we abused and exploited Africa as a country, and
Right.
it's so chaotic and there's so much violence that scientists can't go study. Oh my goodness, there's so many cool civilizations in Africa. We could learn so much, and
Yeah.
it's all been deprived of us or intentionally obscured.
Yeah. Nobody cares because it's not close to home, basically. Yeah. And the other little interesting statistic, since we're on it, is that apparently there's more DNA difference among the people of a certain race than between all of the races in the world. So the idea that DNA between black people and white people is somehow fundamentally different is actually incorrect. There's more similarity between races, DNA-wise, in the whole world than there is even within any one racial group. So that's, anyway, going into that at the end of our session today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I really like that you pointed out the USAID thing because like Elon Musk genocided a ton of people in
Right,
Africa.
right,
And he hates black people, and he's from South Africa, and he is a freaking apartheid loving Nazi.
yeah,
And it really shouldn't surprise anyone what he did. But I'm glad you pointed out that in particular because it does affect everyone else because the global supply chain is the foundation is based on the exploitation of African peoples and nations. That is the bedrock of the global economy.
and the other thing that particular observation does for American viewers is to really get them to understand that despite you know, the rhetoric about, oh, we spend too much money in the world, etc., you could actually say, isn't that interesting that our own efforts, our own tax dollars actually supported the livelihoods of that many people? and that
Yeah.
our nation, the United States, is so rich that when we are generous, we actually cause the survival of hundreds of thousands of people. That should be something that the United States, people in the United States, as regular citizens, should be proud of.
Correct.
That as a country, you have enough richness that you actually give back to the places that your corporations are exploiting to hell, to death, right?
Yeah.
That you're doing
Yeah.
at least a little bit to pay back what the corporations are stealing from those people,
Yeah.
right? And that's why
Totally.
you're supposed to do it. As a northern nation, you should be giving back to those countries because your nations have businesses, Canadian businesses, American, European businesses in Africa, diamond mining, lithium mining, whatever it is, you know? And so who gives back? The people through their taxation give back, and the corporations don't. And
Yeah.
that's one of the fundamental problems with our system, the way it's structured.
Yeah. We need to protect, as a closing statement, what John said, everything. I really hope you internalize that because it's really important. I think this highlights the need for us to look at the UN and what it's capable of, and focus on survival and global democracy. Not
Right.
individual democracy, but a global democracy, because our world has migrated past the ability for individual nations to solve the gravity of the problem. This is
Right.
a human problem. And we need to realize as people that we as a population, as a species, are responsible for our own survival, not the governments that are in power. And we need to remind the world that we would like to not go extinct. Particularly these 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. It's time for us to just not do that, because there's no time to waste, folks.
Yeah.
And we have tools like the UN that we could improve and modify and make better. This is not the time for a corporate board of a global manipulation. And so
Exactly.
I hope that you guys took a lot out of this conversation. I know it's heavy,
It's
but
also
it's
wandery, a bit wandery, Shane. We have to admit we wandered on a bunch of topics around the UN, but
but yeah,
that's what a
it's true.
conversation's like.
Yes, it's just all, there's so much important stuff, and it's like I am really trying to drive the climate thing home right now, because I think it's the biggest challenge we're facing, and
Yeah.
I think we can survive it. We can't undo it, but I think we can survive it. I think that we have the science and the technology to survive it. It's really a matter of, are we going to do it, or are we going to let these people stop us? And that's a decision we all have to make together. So
You have to make
make
that decision together, and your generation has to put maximum pressure to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us for this dialogue today. Saw somebody already scan the QR code. If you want to go and support John and his work, he's a musician, he's an artist, he's a great critical thinker, a advocate for basic humanity, and a good friend of mine. So, I really hope you go and support him. You can scan the QR code, or if you're watching the video, click his name as well, and you can totally get into that kind of get that information from someone who, one, really cares, and two, thinks about it critically before he puts it on a page and puts it on the internet. If you want to support me and my work, we're expanding into some different social media. So this QR code today, if you scan it, will take you to a link tree where you can. I don't know what happened.
We
Why are we?
reconnected.
Okay, so you can go and find all of my other tree. So scan that, and you can go and find our TikTok. We have a whole new angle. We're doing open source reporting, bringing you guys the information that the reporters get, that the analysts get, because all of this information is open source. And at the Firebrand Project, we're really committed to making analysis available to everyone by giving you those resources that journalists tend to withhold for their own exceptionalism, and that is not how we move forward, because all of this information is publicly available. It's a choice to not provide that to the public. So that's what we're going to be working on. So go check us out on the Linktree, scan that. You can click the link description as well. But thank you guys so much for joining us today for this dialogue. Of course, the dialogue must continue. So we will be back hopefully next week, but no matter what, back in 2 weeks here for another dialogue. And thank you so much for being here today, John. Thank you to the 418 people who have joined this this stream today. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Keep an eye out for the other Firebrand Report show. Is a live news report on geopolitics covering the Middle East today with everything going on in Iran. Might be worth your time to check that out. Until next time, everybody, remember, burn bright, resist, go make something, be creative,